I know you got a lot of different stuff going on, and I know a lot of people have seen they've got the podcast. You're calling wrestling all over the place. What has life been like post WWE for you?
It's been a challenge at times. At first it's kind of a shock, and then you're like, what's next? So it's been challenging, but interesting for sure.
So when the release came, like what did you see in your immediate plans? I know you had called hockey, done very well at that, and you're obviously calling wrestling now and still involved with that. What were your initial feelings there? Did you have any like doubts about continuing in wrestling?
Yeah, only because there's only so many places that you can go. And at first I was just kind of, I think at the time I said I took a sabbatical from wrestling. I just kind of needed to get away from it. I was burned out in a lot of ways and just kind of disillusioned probably in a lot of ways. And it was probably later that year that I did my first indie show again and realized that I still loved it and had a lot of fun. So, it was one of those things at first where I thought, well, maybe there'll be an opportunity somewhere. And I knew in my heart that I still wanted to do it, and I knew that I still loved it. And I think I just needed to step away for a little bit. But again, on the same hand, there's only so many places that you can go. And, even now, there's, where are you going to go? There's really only one place to make a full-time living being a wrestling announcer.
Something I've always wondered, and I'm not much of a hockey guy, but I always wondered if you had any input in your WWE name, because I know Rich Brennan is a former hockey player.
Yeah, it's funny. He actually played for the Boston Bruins, and I think he played at BU as well. And I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, and remembered him playing at BU, and remember him playing for the Bruins as well. But I actually wanted my last name to be Breton, Breton, like Breton. Any name any gimmick name that I've used, it's always been something family related, if that makes sense. Like when I first started with Booker T, I think I used my real name at first, but I became Anthony Pratt. My middle name is Anthony. My mom's maiden name is Pratt, so I wanted something that meant something to me. I wasn't going to use that. They wanted me to use Rich just because it was easier. Instead of everybody has 10 names, right? So it's just easier if your first name is the same. But I wanted it to be Breton because that was my mom's maiden name. So, and it was basically they looked at it and they said, well, if you're going to be Breton, why not just be Brennan? It's easier. Yeah. And I do remember saying, well, I don't know if it's a problem that there's a former NHLer that was Rich Brennan. So it was kind of coincidence that happened, but I guess it fit, right?
So is that something, like the process of that, is that something that they come to you and they say, do you have a preference of what you'd like to be called, or do they kind of give you like maybe a first letter, any type of tips or way that they're leaning towards a new name?
No, they just said, you need to come up with a name. I remember one of the guys that worked on the creative side sent me this list of just very stereotypical Italian sounding names, and I'm super proud of my Italian heritage, but I don't want like some Goomba name, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a lot of them were like that. So yeah, I don't know why I gravitated to Brett. And like I said, I just wanted something that meant something to me in some strange way instead of just being some gimmick name.
You mentioned starting out with Booker T. What kind of advice did a guy like that provide you? Because we saw it before, and we've seen it to present day. Like, he's still very much involved in commentary. He's one of the top guys on Raw in that regard. What kind of advice does he have for you? Because, I know that you're into play-by-play. He's more of a color commentary guy.
Yeah, when I started with him, he just, the first time that I'd ever called play-by-play was for him. I had done ring announcing, and I refereed a little bit for the NWA Houston promotion that was around. But it was Booker that I first started doing play-by-play. And I remember the first time that I went and did it, like I can call a hockey game, I can call a baseball game, can call a football game. And even though I'd watched wrestling more or less my whole life with different breaks here and there, I really didn't have a super, super solid idea of how I wanted to approach it. And the first couple shows I wouldn't say were bad, but they weren't great by any means. But Book was just super supportive. He's like, you know what you're doing, just go out there and get it. And I get with him before the shows, and we'd go over stuff. The guy that did color with me at first, Adrian, we'd sit down and we'd kind of, okay, how do we want to approach this, and what stories do we want to tell? But he was kind of hands off. He was just do your thing, and that was huge early on, especially just kind of as I was learning things, because to have somebody of his stature that understands the business the way that he does, for him to just kind of have faith in what I was doing just naturally was that was a super confidence builder.
I know that calling sports and calling pro wrestling are you have some similarities in some regards, but you also have a lot of differences, a lot of things that, whether it be the promoter, booker, whoever, want you to fit in. What are some of those differences that viewers may not know?
I think calling sports, when you're calling a game, the game unfolds organically in front of you. And we've seen a little more of this in wrestling lately. And NXT was more like this as well, where once the match is happening, you focus on the match. The WWE style, the main roster style, is a lot different, where there's different key story points, or, a particular spot in the match, or just something in particular that ahead of time that you have to get in. And timing it to make sure that you've got to, if you're working with two color guys, making sure that the timing is there and that you hit things on the right spot. Like it's very much an orchestrated production of when you say certain things and why you say certain things and why you say certain things at certain times. Sports are a little bit different. Again, if you're calling a hockey game, you're talking about what's in front of you. There may be a graphic that pops up, but generally, once you get to a higher level, say like if you're working for NBC or something, there's usually a production assistant, and a lot of times those graphics are like they're written out on cards and they're numbered cards. So your producer will be like card 21, and the PA hands it to you. WWE is a very different thing, where like even if you have a graphic, or even if that you're tossing to a package, that stuff may change at the last second, and you literally have to be able to come up with that stuff on the fly, on the top of your head. So it's more challenging in that regards, where usually in a sports broadcast, you know everything that's coming, and that it usually doesn't change. Certain things may move. WWE's is different, where, like I said, you may be expecting one graphic to come up, but then something else happens and they change the graphic, and you haven't had time to actually think about what you're going to say. It's just, hey, item 22 is gone. We moved it. We changed it to this graphic, and literally, bang, right there, you have to come up with what you're going to say. So that makes it a little more challenging.
I've heard both sports broadcasters, people who go through broadcast school, they'll often point out things that WWE will almost mandate that you're kind of taught not to do in broadcast school, like when they call moves as like ooh and oh and stuff like that. What is your reaction when you're maybe told to do some of these things that you had been conditioned to not do prior in your professional career?
They're paying the bills. So my approach was, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. I mean, NXT, like I said, was a little more organic in the way that you could call things. But, when you're on the main roster, you understand what that is going in. You're not calling a sport per se. It's a TV show. You're playing a character. Like I wasn't, and I've said this a few other times to people, it's kind of weird to wrap your head around this, but you're not an announcer. You're an actor playing an announcer.
It's a pretty good analogy.
So yeah, and that really is what you're hired for, the role of announcer. And again, I'm not Rich Bocchini, the announcer. When you're there, you're Rich Brennan, the character, the announcer. So the way you have to approach that is a little bit different. But again, my attitude was, look, if I'm going to get there to the top of the mountain in wrestling, if you want me to ignore the match and read promos the entire match, like in my heart, I'm not going to like doing it, but you're paying the bills and I'm cashing the check. So you're the boss.
Many announcers wear different hats. Like they've got a whole lot of different roles. Did you experience that? If so, what type of additional duties? I know that there have been like NXT hosting gigs, live event hosting gigs, stuff like that, producing all types of stuff. Did you do that as well?
I did. When I first got to NXT, I moved from – I was living in Houston at the time and had to move to Orlando to work out of the Performance Center every day. So not only was I there every day there's a VO room in there. We get different talent and different people. And, I worked with Corey Graves very, very early on when I first got there. Just be in that room pretty much all day calling matches. But then there'd be other stuff that you'd get involved in during the week. There were always promo classes with Dusty. So you'd assist with those, either helping shoot them or uploading video or just kind of helping Dusty with whatever he needed. Different office tasks. Dusty would he'd hand write out his notes for like the reviews, the quarterly reviews. And it was a couple of times I had to try to decipher his handwriting. I remember another time Graves and I sitting there in the VO room kind of reading it and we'd be like, we think he means this. So we'd type it and then we'd ask him later, hey, Dream, we weren't sure what you meant by this. You guys know what I'm talking about. I'll read it. If I don't like it, we'll fix it. But anyway, so there was that kind of stuff. But then the live events, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we'd be at the live events and you'd go and you'd set up, you'd run the cables under the ring and plug in the lights, make sure the lights were set up, run the music, run the camera, upload the video we used to make DVDs actually when I first got there. So you'd have to convert the video over the weekend and have that stuff ready to go for the coaches on Monday so they could sit down with the talent in their skull session. So there was always something going on, and always something to do. And on top of that, if they needed a ring announcer, I'd ring announce. If they needed a host, I'd go and host stuff. So there's plenty of work for everybody, and there was a lot of it.
So who was over top of you at NXT? Was that Michael Cole? I would often see him like at NXT events, like at the Arnold and things like that, kind of keeping an eye on things and talent. Is that who was over top of you?
He was. Cole hired me, and I don't know if he's. I don't know. I'm assuming he's still in charge. He was the I forget what his title was, senior director of on-air talent or something like that. So basically they shifted the announcers at the end of 2013 from I forget who's in charge of it before him, but they shifted it over to him, and as far as I know, he's still in charge of all the hires for any on-air talent.
How was he to work for?
Good. I enjoyed working for him. Very, very straightforward, very honest, and very helpful. He wanted us to succeed, whether it was myself, whether it was Tom, whether it was Corey. Anybody who was put in that position, he wanted, he obviously wanted us to succeed. He was a big supporter of mine, and he's actually the guy that called me and told me they were letting me out of my contract as well. So, I have nothing bad to say about Cole.
So when you did your main roster work, were you like directly under Vince? Was he in your ear the whole time? Did you have a Kevin Dunn? Like who did you hear from?
Usually Kevin Dunn in one ear, and then so he's calling the shots from the truck, and then there'd be a producer in your other ear, an announce producer. So that was usually Cole. At times it would be Vince. Vince, I know for sure, was in my ear at the Madison Square Garden show that I did, and he was there a couple times for SmackDown. But like when I was doing SmackDown, he wasn't at SmackDown a lot. When I first started doing it, Tough Enough was still going on, so he was down there for that. And just even now, I don't think he goes to SmackDown all that much.
I know since then you've done a lot of work with MLW, calling these shows as well with Tony Schiavone. What's that been like?
Tony's one of the reasons why I became an announcer in the first place. When I was 8, 9 years old, 10 years old, watching TBS, and it was him and David Crockett. I don't know. There was something about his delivery and it was the first time I think I realized that like that was actually a job. You could be a wrestling announcer. I don't think it ever really clicked. It was always, oh, there's an announcer on TV. You don't really put those things together when you're that young. That was the first time it kind of crystallized. So he, along with Fred Cusick, who was the longtime Boston Bruins voice, those are the two guys that really inspired me to become an announcer. But Tony in particular, like I said, he was the voice of wrestling for me, 85, 86, 87. That great era, the Crockett era, which I still consider to be probably the best era in professional wrestling, just the golden years.
On his podcast, he didn't seem like too keen on the idea of coming back. He seemed like he was very satisfied with maybe never calling wrestling again, but I've noticed a major shift in that since that first show that you all did together, and like a sense of excitement and optimism in his voice. Was that like a hurdle that you had to overcome to a degree with Tony? Because it seemed like he was very reserved about it initially.
I wouldn't say it was a hurdle at all. He was great to work with, totally easy to work with, a lot of fun to work with, and just a natural at it. I don't know that going into it we thought that we'd have him for another show. We figured it would just be one and out. But he had a lot of fun. I remember after we finished up, he was in a great mood and said how much he enjoyed it. And I think I even might have said to him, "Oh, so you're gonna come back for the next show?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think so. I'm gonna talk to Cora. I think so." So it seemed like he had a lot of fun.
So you all have this MLW Never Say Never show coming up next week, and there's just so many people on the show. There's John Hennigan. There's Fightful, former Fightful.com podcaster Matt Riddle. You got Joey Ryan, Santana Garrett, Laurel Van Ness. Like they're just like name after name after name. What's it like? I mean, you've been to WWE. You've seen what they look for in talent, and you see all these people, and like you could pick any like half dozen guys that could probably be there next year or in a few months be signed to this. So what's that like being on a show that is independent, a little under the radar, but like I said, you look at the talent here and it's unreal.
Yeah, there's such an explosion of talent and so many talented performers and just guys who are breaking the mold in a lot of ways. It really is. This is it's a crucial time for wrestling, and I think 5, 10, 15 years, we're going to look back, I think, at this whole era right now as a very, very important time in wrestling, another renaissance in many ways of professional wrestling. And it's because you're kind of seeing this resurgence of smaller promotions and more localized promotions, even in some ways. But on top of that, promotions that are just doing it different and listening to what the fans really want and delivering it to them. It's not rocket. It's really not rocket science. It's wrestling, and MLW wants to be at the forefront of that. And you look at the talent that was on the first show. You look at the talent for this coming show. Jimmy Havoc's on the show. You mentioned Hennigan, MVP. So some guys who have been around, but younger guys too. Like I don't know if you've seen Sammy Guevara yet. But Sammy's an incredible talent. He's an incredible talent. I've called a number of his shows, or a number of his matches over at Wrestle Circus, and he's just the last year's really, really, really taken off. So I'm excited for him to get this opportunity on another big stage with MLW to show people what he can do. He's gonna be going up against Jason Cade, another exciting younger guy who's really trying to break the mold here in the business. So there's so much good talent that's out there, and so many guys who are just exciting to watch that maybe they don't fit into the WWE mold right now. Maybe they do, but it's just cool that, for me, it's cool that they have this other alternative aside from, not knocking any of the, not knocking Impact or whatever, but, not everybody can go there. Not everybody can go to Ring of Honor. Not everybody can go to, some of the lucha promotions. I think there's a space here for something like MLW to grow, But on top of that, I think that helps. Again, some of the more localized promotions, like you have Defy out in Seattle and AIW and some of these other promotions that are big within their cities as well. I think MLW can maybe take the cream of the crop from those promotions and put them on an even bigger stage, and I just think it helps everybody.
I know that you've done some work with Fest Wrestling, Wrestle Circus. What all do you have going on outside of calling MLW?
Yeah, Fest Wrestling. We've got a couple of shows coming up here. I've actually got a 3-and-3 stretch this coming week. So the MLW show is on Thursday night, and then that'll be up on VOD over the weekend. Then the following night, I'm in St. Augustine for a Fest show, and then the Saturday night over to Gainesville, which is our usual home for Fest. So I haven't done a 3-and-3, I think, probably since I was in hockey. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But I've got that. I'm not sure what's going on with Wrestle Circus right now. There are some issues there. They're not financial issues. I know there's a lot of people saying, they canceled the last show because NXT was running. That has nothing to do with it. So I'm not sure what's up with that, but I just want to put that out there publicly. It's not a financial thing. It's not. It's a completely. If you know, and if you don't, you'd probably be surprised when you find out. So I'm just kind of hoping for the best for everybody there. Wrestle Circus is a lot of fun. Hopefully they're able to come back. Got a couple other irons in the fire as well, but just really looking forward to these upcoming shows here, the MLW show and then the back-to-back Fest shows.
I know you do other shows with MLW as well, the J.J. Dillon show. I've done some work with him too, and he's got great stories. And, of course, you appear on MLW radio shows all the time. How did that relationship develop with MLW?
I did a show I think it was last May, a show in downtown Orlando. It was a company called Division Pro that tried to get something going. And I ended up calling the show with Mr. St. Laurent. So we talked a little bit, and I don't think he was surprised that I was still in Orlando. I think he had assumed that once I got let go or whatever from WWE that I had gone back to Houston or wherever else. So he was surprised that I was still here, and he kind of mentioned, I think there's something in the works, and so that's kind of how that came about. I had actually talked to Court, not even about hosting a show. For my regular shoot job, I do sports radio updates, and I work from a home studio. I'm basically producing podcasts, but they run them on the radio. Long story short, I said, hey, if you need somebody to just produce something, edit the guts, take the audio, put it all together, and produce the show, if I can make a couple extra bucks doing that, I'd pretty much do that anyway. And he was the one that kind of threw it out there that he'd been talking to JJ. And I jumped at that right off the bat. I was a huge Horseman fan growing up. I think I said before, a huge fan of that era. So as soon as he mentioned that he was talking to JJ, I jumped at that. And luckily, JJ and I hit it off, and we have fun every week. We do things a little bit different. We're not super funny. It's not really the approach that we're taking. It's more of like kind of taking his book and expanding on some of his autobiography and just kind of documenting the history. If you're a fan of wrestling, you could probably get into it. There are some people who say, it's kind of dry or whatever. Like I said, we're more documenting history than I think we are trying to be funny or silly, even though I love the podcasts that do that kind of thing.